Okay,
Right.
hello and welcome everybody. Today we're talking about teacher burnout with Aggie Enyedi. I know a lot of you who are attending will be interested in whether you get a certificate of attendance for the webinar today. As usual, we'll be sending out a link for feedback about the webinar, and in that you can put your details to get a certificate of attendance. Please remember it takes about a month to process it and send it to you by email. Also, if you have any questions to ask Aggie, please put them in the chat box and I will make a note of any questions that Aggie doesn't manage to answer and we'll talk about those at the end. And so today we're going to be talking about how to avoid teacher burnout. And our guest speaker is Aggie Enyedi. She was a school-based mentor for over 10 years at a university in Budapest. I don't know how to pronounce that, Aggie. What's the name of the university you work for?
University in Budapest.
Okay, I'm glad I didn't try saying that. And there she's a full-time teacher educator and she teaches in the Department of English Language and Pedagogy. She also runs workshops and in-service courses for teachers and presents regularly at national and international conferences. And she's run courses for teachers in various countries such as Germany, Uzbekistan, Spain and Turkey for pilgrims. And she also works for Oxford Teachers Academy and Via Lingua. So got loads of experience working with teachers and has done a lot of research into teacher burnout. So in this webinar, Aggie will look at the background to burnout, the danger signs, and share some teachers' ideas about how we can all stay away from it. So great to have you here, Aggie. Thanks. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Alan, for the introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, good night to anybody and everybody in this virtual webinar room. I can see that there's a crowd from all over the world, and that's quite amazing. And I hope that we can not only open up what burnout is, but also talk on a more positive note, how to avoid burnout. Now, I hope you have your coffees, teas, and all sorts of comfort toys with you, because you will need something like that during this talk. What I experienced is that when people start talking about a problem, an illness, or a difficult condition, and start understanding what it is and how it works, they start discovering symptoms on themselves. And there will be a point, I'm sure, during the webinar when you say that, could I be also burnt out? Or does it mean that I suffer from burnout? And I can promise that you probably won't. You won't belong to the burnt out community. I will tell you at the end of the webinar why I'm pretty sure that you are not one of the victims of professional burnout. But I think all of us have a duty here, a duty for ourselves, a duty towards colleagues, so that a teaching community is healthy and inspiring and sparkling, and we don't get into this downward spiral of professional burnout. Okay, you know about me a little bit, and I won't tell you more. You can read it on the blog and on the background information. But there is one thing that I would like you to know about me, is that I spent all my professional life with students and colleagues, and I became more and more interested in fellow teachers, students who I work with, pre-service and in-service English teachers, and I have a special attention for their mental and emotional well-being, because I think that this is one of our most important professional tools, more important than a course book, more important than the board in the classroom. And I think that if we can learn how to take care of ourselves in this respect, our students will benefit much more. Okay, so on the go, the 4 pillars of my talk is what burnout actually is, what is behind it, what are the signs, how to notice burnout, and finally, most importantly, what we can do about it. So I have a task for you, not too complicated at this time of the day. I don't think it would be fair. I'm going to show you 3 images. I'm going to ask Alan to put up a poll here. I would like you to choose which image is the best metaphor for you to signify burnout. And here are the photos, here are the images. One with the underground, one with the cat, or the marathon runner. And I can see that people are putting their votes in. There are a lot of votes for the first 2. The marathon runner is lagging behind. Yes. Okay. And at the moment, I think the underground picture is seems to be the winner. Yes. And it either means that you know a lot about burnout, or it means that you have read the blog where we use the same image. Right. Okay. And the reason why I also think that the best representation, the best metaphor for being burnt out is the man sitting on that seat in the underground station, is that burnout is not only a feeling, it's also a condition where you're isolated, where you're on your own. It's not simply being tired. It's basically building a wall around you. If you look at that image, you can see that this person is ultimately and painfully alone. The cat, I like the cat picture, fine, but just having a pleasant snooze in while you work, or feeling tired while you work, that's all right. The marathon runner is going to be significant later on, because I think nothing is more straining, nothing is more tiring than running the marathon. And this person is not burnt out, anything but. We'll come back to that a little bit later. Okay, so a real task now, a real thinking task after this warm-up is the following. I have 7 statements, and all of them are in connection of burnout. This is the typical things that people say. The question is, are they myths or truth? How much do you think these are true? And there's no poll, just think them over. I'll give you a little time. So here are the actually 8 statements. Okay, I'll give you the answer. In the next slide, whatever you can see in blue is a myth. Whatever you can see in red is truth. Now see what the result is. All of them actually seem to be myths, and there's 2 that are kind of half and half. I would like to go through these bit by bit and see why these are mostly myths, and why people are basically wrong about the issue of burnout. People very often say that you get burnt out if the workload is too much. That's not actually true. If you are satisfied in your job, if you get a lot of recognition, if you feel you're successful, if you feel that you're in the right place, it's not burnout. You can be tired, you can be exhausted, but being burnt out is a completely different issue. A lot of people feel that being underpaid is part of the truth. It's not. Being recognized is, but recognition, it doesn't only come in terms of money. And being underpaid, if that was true, then so many more people would be burnt out. Typically happens after many years on the job. Now, the reason why this is not true is that a lot of teachers who are senior teachers, who have been teaching for a long time, usually develop very good compensatory strategies towards burnout, and they know how to deal with it. They know how to recognize the early symptoms, and they know how to get out of it. The other side of the coin, that novice teachers, beginner teachers can also be victims of burnout as early as being in training can be a situation where people feel burnout symptoms. And I'm going to show you later on some kind of proof that it is an issue with beginner teachers and not just teachers who have given up because of many years. Number 4, a psychological condition. It can be, yes, but not only. If you're burnt out, it's also a physical, medical condition in a more severe form. You need medical help, you might need therapy, and the best thing would be not to ever get to this stage of burnout. I think it's professional issue at its early stage. You can address this within the teaching community, within your school, within your professional community. At a later stage, you need some expert help from medical people. It would be lovely to avoid that. Number 5, if teachers are not ambitious enough, if they don't care, and then they get burnt out. Actually, the opposite is true. If you set your standards very high and then you feel you can't meet these standards, you're always frustrated and you don't see any reward in what you do. That's a wider road to burnout than not caring in the first place. If you don't care, you are just a lousy teacher. If you do care, but you can't do what you want to achieve, then you might be a victim of burnout. Number 6, is it easy to spot? No. There are several reasons for that. Burnout has been compared to depression. It's not quite the same as depression, but it has some similar qualities. And one quality is that people don't notice it in themselves. They find it easier to notice it in others. They don't notice it in themselves, and if they do, they tend to cover it up. People in depression, people in burnout are hiding. They show a nicer face. They feel that they are the only people in the world who feel this way. They blame themselves. It's part of the condition, and it's very difficult to spot. Perhaps we can open an eye to this issue as well later on. Myth number 7, it's best helped with plenty of rest. That's not true in itself. Rest itself is not enough. If you're tired, you rest and then you're okay. If you're burnt out, you need energy, and physical rest doesn't give you a professional spark. It doesn't give you the kind of inspiration that you need to get out of this downward spiral. And my last point here, which is in 2 colors, it mostly affects men. Now, it seemed to be true, at least for a while. Burnout was identified as a typical manager's disease, and managers at that time usually tended to be men. I think there's 2 reasons why there seem to be more men on the burnout side. One is that perhaps men are still more often in responsible managerial jobs. The other is that perhaps women have more developed compensatory strategies. Now, that's not fair. Let's phrase it like women are less less honest. They tend to cover it up more. When a man is burnt out, it seems to show it easier because they are more impulsive. Their jobs require them to do things that reveal this symptom at an earlier stage. But in teaching, gender equality is absolutely observable. Actually, I think worldwide there are more ladies in teaching than men. And I'm going to argue that teaching is basically a manager's job. And this makes it equally important for men and women to think about the danger of burnout in teaching. So much about the background and the myths and truths. And I would like you to show, I would like you to see a definition of what actually burnout is. I'll give you a minute to read this. There are a lot of definitions of burnout, and there's a lot that they share. The word fatigue, diminished interest, stress, emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, lack of accomplishment, and the lack of recognition. These are the central issues in here. And the reason why I chose Helen Jane Orzel's phrase of the burnout definition is the following. These are the opening lines of an MA thesis. The author is an undergraduate music student at the San Jose University, faculty of the School of Music and Dance. And she examined the issue of burnout in the community of trainees who are training to be musicians. And that's amazing. Can you be burnt out at the stage of starting your job, at the stage of being in training, while you are at university, when you haven't even started your profession? Can you already burn out? And the answer is yes. It's a very interesting thesis. Actually, one of my MA students this year addressed the same issue with would-be teachers. She wrote her undergraduate thesis on how to manage stress during the time of the teaching practice. And she examined her fellow students, what sort of stress they have and how do they cope with it. And it turns out that stress, even in very early stages of being a teacher, is tremendous. And I think it's just like the present perfect. When you're a language learner, you think it's very difficult, and then you tend to forget later on how immensely difficult it was to understand the concept of present perfect. The same with stress. At the beginning, you struggle, and when you are an established teacher, you just think, oh, that's very easy. Beginners don't have problems. They are young, they are fresh, they are energetic. What sort of problems might they have? And they do, but we have long forgotten about the stage when we were struggling as beginners in the classroom. So burnout is primarily related to stress. The amount of stress, the way people manage stress, and the professional and personal community they belong to that helps them to overcome this stress. That, I think, is very central to understanding what burnout actually is. The longer the condition goes on, the more severe it becomes, simply because people who are burnt out tend to isolate themselves, tend to hide. They minimize contact with others, and they lose more and more chances to get help for their condition. It's good I can't see you actually, because at this point people tend to be very depressed and looking for signals for burnout in themselves. So please don't. Let's have a look at what is behind the burnout agenda. What is common in people who suffer from burnout is that they work in some kind of caring profession. It was first identified in managers, fair enough, lawyers, psychologists, people in medical professions, and of course teachers also qualify as professionals in caring professions from this sense of the word. In this sense of the word, people work with people, and a teacher who works a lot, probably you know best that the results of a teacher's work doesn't primarily depend on how much the teacher invests. It also depends on the students, and it's very often in balance. It's very often not in balance how much the teacher invests and how much the students can profit from it. The results of your work are beyond the power of your professional activity. It manifests itself in a completely different person. If there is a lot of emotional and professional investment and there are no results for a long time, teachers become isolated. They might have a good time in the classroom, but they cannot establish themselves as professionals compared to other teachers who have students, high achiever students, competition winners. They pass tests and examinations with flying colors. I think it's very important that a teacher who closes the classroom door behind himself or herself is working in a very solitary job. And it's not the students with whom a teacher has to be popular, satisfied, or feel successful. It's not your reference group. The reference group, the professional reference group for a teacher from whom you should get acknowledgement, with whom you compare, with whom you share professional issues, is fellow professionals. And the more you close the classroom door behind you and the more you try to energize yourself from your students, the less you link with fellow professionals in the staff room. We come back to the staff room because that's a very important issue in burnout. But I also think it's a management issue in a school. The management should be and is very often responsible for sorting out teachers, timetabling what sort of groups you get, what sort of materials you use, how much support is given to individual teachers in a teaching context. I was a little bit upset when it turned out, when I was talking to managers of language schools, that when they think about burnout, they primarily think about how burnt out they can be. And they very rarely think about how the teachers who work with them also need some kind of support to avoid burnout. And this is where I feel it's important to know that in business, managing burnout has become part of the responsibility of the management. There are coaches, there are HR professionals who support people, who send them to trainings, who give some kind of coaching help to people who need that. We don't have just yet have this in education. Let me make a little bit of a detour here. You probably know TED conferences, where the talks are uploaded to this wonderful website called TED. And there are two people who are among the most popular TED Talks ever. One is Daniel Pink, who is a career analyst, and the other is Dan Ariely, who is a behavior economist. And Dan Pink has a talk on the puzzle of motivation. And that's him. You can see this guy with a bunch of carrots. And his main point is that the carrots and sticks motivation model doesn't work anymore. what actually matters is autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Somebody is motivated who feels autonomous, who feels that he or she is his or her own boss and has responsible decisions to make. Mastery, if you feel that you're good, if you feel that you can achieve at a level where your expectations are. And purpose means to see the purpose of your job, to see where you're going, if there is a goal, a realistic goal set for your work. These are the most important motivating factors. And this is why money and being underpaid doesn't matter that much. I have to say it very quietly before people who pay teachers hear this. The other person I would like to refer to is Dan Ariely, who is a behavior economist. And he says something extremely similar. Meaning creation challenges ownership, identity, and pride. For him, that's what makes us feel good about work. Do we get all these as teachers? Motivation is part of fighting burnout. Motivation, giving motivation back to teachers who are less motivated, who lost the spark, can't motivate students. They can be walking encyclopedias, they can be grammar books, and they can be fantastic dictionaries, but they cannot be teachers. So with all that, what are the signs of burnout? Let's have a look at that. As I said, signs are not easy to find, to identify. In yourself, you need to be very honest to notice the signals of burnout. It's easier to spot it in others. Hiding is an important issue here. Compensation strategies might work, but covering strategies are working against of identifying this issue. How you can identify burnout is very often through a professional tool, which is used in America a lot, is the Maslach. Just a minute. Yes, a Maslach Burnout Inventory. That's the official name. Christina Maslach was the person who put that together. It looks like a questionnaire. And let me just quote a couple of items from it so that you can see what it's like to be measured against this inventory. If you had to, on a scale of 0 to 6, never and always, if you rate the following sentences, what would your scoring be? So remember, 0 is never, 6 is every day. The first item is, I feel fatigued when I get up and have to face another day in my work. 0, 6. 2, I feel students blame me for their problems. 3, I don't really care what happens to some of my students. Number 4, I feel exhilarated after working closely with my students. Number 5, I have accomplished many worthwhile things in this job. Number 6, I feel I'm positively influencing other people's lives through my work. And number 7, I can easily create a relaxed atmosphere with my students. I can see your scores in the chat box. Well done. Now, basically, if you're scoring high on the first 4 items and low on the last 4, then there is a chance that you are on the way to burnout. From your responses, I feel that it's the other way round. So if you scored low on the first 4 statements and high on the last 4, then you're a teacher who is not only not burning out, but you can also help others. And where to do that? Well, here's the key to success, the staff room. I think it's an immensely important thing, what sort of staff room you have in your schools, because that's where it happens. That's where you meet fellow professionals. That's your reference group. And that makes a huge difference what you actually do in the classroom. The little time you spend with your colleagues. I know some teachers don't even have a staff room. Today, it's not, I can see somebody in pink. I'm not burning out. Well done, Azza. Okay, so here I think it's very important to feel that even if you don't have a staff room or you don't have time to spend time with your colleagues, there are other ways. This webinar is one. You can have your professional learning network through all sorts of social media. There's no excuse for a teacher to feel isolated. That's the good news. So let's go into the staff room. I'm going to ask Ellen to help us with the second poll. I'm going to show you again 3 images, 3 things that people are looking for in staff rooms. One of the image is coffee and paper. Do you go to the staff room to prepare and relax? The second one is the pigeonholes. Do you go there to catch up with paperwork, administration? And the third option is, do you go to the staff room to be with your colleagues, to meet other teachers? What's most typical if you just need to choose one? Is it professional preparation? Do things before and after your lessons to pad the lessons with something? Do you go there for the not so bright side of the job, catch up with paperwork? Or do you go there in the hope of finding your colleagues and spending some quality time with them? Answers are nicely coming in. And I'm very happy to see that catching up with paperwork is the last on the list. That's good. And a lot of people identify staff rooms with meeting colleagues. And that's fantastic news. It's really nice because that's what you should do. That's why you have a school. A school is basically a community where teachers have, remember Dan Ariely's thing, identity. A school can give an identity to their teachers, having similar values, having similar solutions to problems, being on the same wavelength. That's what a good staff room can provide. Okay, so let's go on. When I started to look into burnout, I talked to a lot of teachers. I always got as far as being very sad about the whole issue, that's not nice to feel that there is this glooming condition behind us that at a certain point of our professional career we can burn out. Let's see what we can do about it. I asked them what they do with the staff room, and this is what they said. Basically on the basis of the images you have just seen. But if you look at the last item on the list, complain. Now that's very common in staff rooms. In my job, I often visit our students who are doing their teaching practice in all sorts of schools. And you probably know that when you enter a school, you get the feel of the context, you get the vibes, you get the energy level of the people who work there. And there are some staff rooms where you enter and you can hear that people complain. They complain about course books, the students, the curriculum, just anything and everything. a complaining community is something that you join your efforts in helping each other to let off steam through complaining. Now that pulls people down. That's not a good way to build a community. I also asked my colleagues what is a good staff room for them. So this is on the left, you can see what they normally do in a staff room, and this is what they wish they did. A good staff room has a sense of energy. I don't know how many of you had the feeling that when you go into a classroom, you are not on top of the world. You feel tired, you have a headache, and when you finish your lesson, you come out of the classroom, you are energized. Has it ever happened to you? I think if a lesson has a flow, if you feel successful, your students are wonderful, that's what you feel. And a lot of teachers are looking for this in their teaching, to get energized from students. And that's great if it happens, but that's not who should give you professional energy. A good staff room should work in the same way. In a good staff room, people greet. In a good school, it's very difficult to walk down the corridor 10 meters without somebody saying hello to you. People smile, people make eye contact, people acknowledge. What sort of acknowledgement? I hear very often, thank you for that warmer, it worked wonderfully, great idea. Or, do you want to hear what I did with your pictures? Giving acknowledgement, sharing professional knowledge, and thanking other teachers. Messages. I always loved to get messages on my desks from colleagues, messages about here's a link, or messages in my email. Here's a link to a fantastic video. Hope you will like it. Messages on the message board, which are not about deadlines and information only, but also messages about happy events. One of my students passed this and that exam. Messages about upcoming teachers' seminars. Messages about professional things rather than administrative issues. And the nicest things I always like to find on my desk is a little post-it note saying thanks from somebody. And I knew what it was all about. It was just one word, but people thanking each other. That's amazing. And I can see that you are thanking each other in the chat box. That's a nice professional community forming here. And the last thing that I feel a staff room should have is time. A friend of mine told me that when you're short of time, just stop. When you're short of time, take a break. When you're short of time, pause. This kind of pause, this kind of mental refreshment is very important in a staff room. I feel that a lot of staff rooms add to the stress level and don't let teachers get rid of it. You probably remember this picture on the left. If you're young enough to have read Harry Potter, that's Moaning Myrtle from the Harry Potter series. And my question is, that's my fourth pillar in this talk. Now, what can we do about stress? What can we do about initial burnout? And the one thing, the most important thing is that a teacher, instead of becoming a moaning myrtle and bringing colleagues down, a teacher elevates herself and himself to a manager issue and manages burnout in themselves and in colleagues. I think it's important to know that burnout is contagious. At corporate level, in good companies, the engagement factor is regularly measured in people. Engagement factor simply means how they are engaged in their jobs, how motivated they are, how much they are on their jobs, how much they get out of this. And what is very interesting that if the engagement factor is very low with one person, it's usually not that one person, but the whole department. People energize each other and people demotivate each other. So it's basically self-defense. You need to treat your colleagues against burnout to be safe for yourself. And how to do that? I feel that teachers are managers, and I would like you to redefine the teaching job in a little way. If you think back to the times when you started teaching, was it individual vocabulary items? Was it grammar points that was difficult, or was it class management that wasn't the most difficult for you? Dealing with discipline, dealing with 20 students at the same time. My students say that class management is actually a much more problematic part of the job, and we learn how to do this. We learn how to motivate, we learn how to put people into pairs and groups, we learn how to take and give feedback, we learn how to do a lot of things that a manager needs to do. And that's exactly what we need to do in our staff rooms as well. I looked at a couple of language course books, and these are some of the instructions that we give to our students on a daily basis. We tell them to work in pairs and groups. We ask them to cooperate. We ask them to ask questions, listen again, revise and check, learn it, use it, check your work, evaluate yourself using the I can statements. These are rubrics, instructions from course books, and we ask our students to do this. And through that, we can create a wonderful, coherent, working climate in classrooms. Sometimes, I hope most of the time. You know how to energize students, and you know how to make them into a good working team. Can we bring these classroom skills into the staff room? The way I can imagine to prevent burnout is that teachers in staff rooms work in pairs and groups. There are little projects. There are teams or pairs who share materials, who design teaching materials, put them together, store them together, and pass it on to other teachers. Teachers who cooperate. Very often teachers say that I don't have the time. They don't have the time to cooperate because I'm preparing for my lessons. And it might be that you are preparing exactly the same teaching aids as your colleagues, and it would be just easy to cooperate, but you don't have time because you prepare on your own. Asking questions, professional questions. There's that exercise. How did you approach that? That's difficult for me. What would you do in this situation? And listen again. Listen to each other. A burnt out person needs somebody to listen to them. They very rarely need advice. They need listening. Revise and check. That's in another terminology, it's called reflection. Reflect on your teaching. That's a huge potential for professional development. Learn it, use it. I don't know which course book I found it, but I think it's a lovely way. For teachers to refresh their repertoire, learn something new and take it into your classroom. Find YouTube video and use it for something. Do anything and everything to take you off this automatic pilot mode as a teacher. Check your work, evaluate yourself with I can. I think it's extremely important that teachers set realistic goals and celebrate when they reach those. Not only at the end of the year, teachers' jobs are very often measured in terms of, is your administrative duty done? I think we need day-to-day, day-by-day goals or weekly goals, and discuss with colleagues and see if we can have a reason for celebration. These are just some of the ways that we can deal with burnout. Couple of images again about a good staff room. And these came from teachers, fellow teachers who work in communities where there is no chance for anybody to burn out. One thing here is, let's go clockwise, to have a bulletin board which is not about duties, not about administrative issues, but something professional development issues, personal victories, student successes, something positive. Thank yous. I talked about that a little. Thanking for teachers, thanking each other is essential because if you share, then you have a reason to thank. One way to approach a person who is burnt out, and you see that the person is avoiding eye contact, the person is sitting by himself, doesn't have time for coffee, and you think that this person is building a wall around himself or herself as a teacher, you approach this person and ask for help. Because then you have a reason to say thank you. You ask for a warmer, you ask for a pen even, and then you have something to talk about. Sharing ideas. If you have ideas, do you keep them for yourself, or you put them into a big box or a file holder? Do you have electronic collection of teaching ideas in your schools? If not, it's time to start building one. A suggestion box, an earlier version of the same thing. But teachers talking to each other and giving little presents. I think that's what a fantastic staff room is all about. Now, I think I said at the beginning of my talk that I had a pretty good idea that the people in this virtual webinar room are not on the way to burnout. And the reason why I think is that you wouldn't be here if you were burnt out. People don't look for professional context. They don't go to conferences, they don't go to webinars, they don't go to workshops. They suffer by themselves. And if you take any energy away from this webinar, I would like to give you a little homework, which is basically to go back to your schools, talk to your fellow teachers about this issue, and see what you can do to prevent anybody to feel isolated, to feel unsuccessful, to feel low of energy, and how you can energize and inspire each other. As one of my colleagues said that, you cure burnout with fire. And that's what she said. It only takes a positive spark to stop burnout in other people. And I would like to finish my talk on this note. And if there are any questions, I would like to give you a chance to ask them, and perhaps I can answer. Thank you for listening. I can see a lot of thank yous. That's amazing. I can't see any questions at the moment. Perhaps if I missed a question from earlier on, can I ask Alan to remind me? Oh, here's a question. Oh, here was a question. It's just gone.
Hi, Aggie. I'm back here.
How many hours a teacher should spend a day? Okay. How many? I can see the questions now. Okay. What's the role of school management in lessening burnout in the teachers? I think it's a very good question. Whenever a teacher gets into this automatic pilot mode, there are dozens of ways for the managers, for the management to get the teacher out of this. Send the teacher to a workshop and ask the teacher to share experience after that. Ask the teacher to bring together a little team to prepare extra materials and which they can share afterwards. Ask teachers to visit each other. Now, people say that it's impossible, we don't have time to visit each other. I think visiting teachers, which is visiting each other's classes, is one of the most fantastic ways to energize yourself. You see some good practice, you try to take that, you discuss the lesson afterwards, you try to build some ideas into your own teaching. that's an amazing thing to do. That's why novice teachers are paired up with a mentor and they observe each other's lessons. If you don't have time to observe somebody, swap classes. I have first-hand experience on that. It can happen on a one-off basis. I have a class, you have a class at the same time with me. So I prepare a lesson plan. I talk you through my lesson plan and you will teach that. And I will teach your class instead. We talk before the lesson, we teach each other's classes, and then we sit down for coffee afterwards. It doesn't need any extra time apart from the 2 coffees, one before and one after. And lovely things happen. You engage in a very high quality professional discussion because you share with a colleague what you have seen in their classrooms. You can compare your class, the routines of your class with somebody else's, and you can ask questions that, what have you done that this works in your class and it doesn't work for me? And then it's so nice to go back to your old class and see them again afterwards, after you have taken a little break. And this should be possible to do in any school.
There's a couple of people, Aggie, who are interested in how to avoid burnout if you're self-employed or a freelancer or you don't actually have a staff room.
I think these people are at the best place at the moment. I mean, there are all these webinars that the British Council organises, one every month. There will be 2 coming up very soon. And if you find people in virtual reality, it's perfectly okay to find somebody who is interested in the same thing. And then you start exchanging emails, find each other on Facebook. At the IATEFL conference last year, I have seen a friend of mine who met 4 people there who she had never seen before, but for a year or so they have been in touch with each other virtually. They were teaching in similar contexts. They met virtually somewhere, and they stayed in touch. They shared ideas. They gave feedback to each other. And for a self-employed people, I think it's very, very important. Nothing is easier today with the internet. So attending webinars, attending real-life workshops, real-life conferences, and to build your professional learning network, PLN, virtually is a fantastic way not to feel isolated. I hope it answers some of the questions.
And then Roxanne has just asked, if you are burnt out or on the way to being burnt out, what can you do to get back on track?
Yes, I can see that, Roxanne. Thanks a lot for the question. At an early stage of burnout, I think it's a school issue, a staff room issue. If you are already at a later stage of burnout, then you need professional help. There are people in the medical profession, there are psychologists who are specialized for burnout. I don't think teachers are actually likely to get so burnt out because you leave the job. There are so many people who leave the job exactly for that reason. Fortunately or unfortunately, teaching English, it doesn't pay that much to stick to a job that gives you so much pain. So let's hope that people who feel that I'm on the way to be burnt out are still at a milder stage of the issue, of the condition. And in that case, do whatever you would do with the students. What do you do when your students are not motivated? You bring something in for your students to find motivation in there. Bring something to your staff room. You can initiate, you get out of your shell, and then you initiate some kind of contact. Let's come together for 15 minutes and bring extra materials for that unit in this book. Or I have a few pictures to show you that I used for such activities. Could somebody bring warmers for an unmotivated class of students? And then you share these ideas and then start looking for the next one. the next occasion. A brilliant example is something that one of my colleagues started in Hungary not very long ago. She is a pestalozzi trainer, and she started pestalozzi Fridays in Budapest. Once a month, teachers are coming together and on a Friday afternoon, and you can imagine the way they come. They are tired after a hard week's work, and there's usually 40, 50 people who come there as a kind of a teacher's circle, and they show each other techniques, activities, discuss professional issues from 4 to 7. And at 7 o'clock, it's just amazing to see the same people leaving the room. They are all energized, they feel better, a little bit of investment, and they are just transformed into a healthy, normal human being ready for the weekend. If they save these 3 hours for themselves and they go home from school straight after finishing, they are not ready for a relaxing weekend. You have to put yourself into a mood to be able to enjoy your free time. And these people started to look out for the next occasion. So when you get into the habit, I think it's also important that this is also infectious, how to get used to the good things, and don't get used to things that pull you down. Somebody said, I'm so optimistic. Now, I think I'm not optimistic. This is part of self-defense. You need to be optimistic to find the good sides of teaching. There's so many good things about teaching, and it's nice to be with other teachers. Like I enjoy being with you at the moment, and I think if you focus on that, you consciously focus on that, it's something like, let's go back to the marathon runner for a moment. Nothing can be harder to run the marathon, but whether or not you feel the joy of running and you feel good about running the marathon, or you feel the pain at every single step, now that's decided in your mentality.
Aggie, do you have any suggestions for books that people can read about strategies to help them with burnout?
There's a lot on the internet that you can get electronically, and no surprise, most of these are medical and psychological pages. Whatever is, and also management, I think whatever is given about burnout and business is usable in a teaching context, partly because, as I said, teachers are managers. And also, if you feel like going into classroom dynamics, there's this wonderful book, an oldie but goodie, by Jill Hadfield, about how to build good classroom dynamics. You can do the same with a staff room. So take whatever you can do very well with your students and do the same to your colleagues.
Excellent, that's a great suggestion. So that was Jill Hadfield.
Jill Hadfield's book in many issues, I think, the Oxford University Press from the 1990s. But that's a very good start because it doesn't take you away from your everyday work. But also, as I said, business websites where business professionals see how to put people into different constellations, how to put them into different groups, how to regroup people, how to take a person on the way to burnout out of that community and put the person into another context so that they can see a difference. That's part of.
And one more, the final question that there's been a theme running through is about the problems when managers or bosses aren't very motivating. Is there anything that we can do to help with burnout when people above us are not really motivating us particularly? Difficult question.
Well, there is a Hungarian saying that that goes, yes, that's also a Hungarian saying, everything is a difficult question. There's a Hungarian saying that if you've got to do it yourself, Your Majesty, if you haven't got a servant. So if you feel that there is no support from the management's side, because the management needs to work at a different level, and they might not be aware of what's happening, or might not be in the position, or they might not know how to handle this. I think our profession, a teacher, we are trained to motivate. We are trained, it's part of our initial training, how to work with people, how to give them inspiration, how to give goals to their learning, how to evaluate our students. I think we are the best managers of motivation at classroom level. Perhaps it's easier to do some self-help than to train our managers to be professionals in that. I don't want to say that they don't have their responsibility, but you can peel yourselves off from the management if you feel that they are not supporting enough, and start a self-help.
And even if you're part-time or something, you can start in a small way just by hooking up with another teacher. You know, it doesn't have to be a big project, does it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's enough to find one person to create a positive professional bubble in a staff room where everybody is a moaning myrtle. One person is enough to get attached to. That's what happens when you go to a new school as a novice teacher and you have a mentor. Remember how much energy that one person can give you. And you can identify the most positive person for you among your colleagues, and come together for coffee and make your coffee time into quality professional experience.
And another saying I always like, and it helps me a lot, is that if you don't like something, change it. If you can't change something, change your attitude.
That's very true, Alan. I think that's very true, because it depends on your mentality, how things affect you.
Okay, well, we've run out of time. That's been a fascinating talk, and thank you so much for explaining it to us, everything that you found about burnout, and giving some really positive suggestions as to how to keep away from it. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you very much, Alan, for your help. And I would also like to say thank you for this very varied and very international group of participants, and I hope you can take some energy away from this, and it makes you think, and probably you're ready for the weekend now.
And don't forget that we have 2 more webinars this month. On the 28th of May, we have the Elton's Award winners. They're going to talk about dyslexia and how to successfully include learners with dyslexia in the English language classroom. And on the 29th, we have a talk about factors influencing success in teaching English in state primary schools. So those are 2 very interesting webinars coming up at the end of the month. And you can find a recording of this webinar and details of the other webinars here. And don't forget that Aggie's written an excellent blog post, so you've got a written record of her ideas too. Okay, thanks a lot everyone. Thanks Aggie, and I'll join Aggie in wishing you all a wonderful weekend. I'm going to close the meeting now. Bye-bye.